On the 29th of May, 1453, 3 hours before daybreak, Mahomet Bey, son of Murat the Turk, came himself to the walls of Constantinople to begin the general assault which gained him the city. The Sultan divided his troops into 3 groups of 50,000 men each. One group was of Christians, who were kept in his camp against his will. The second group was of men of a low condition, peasants and the like. And the third group was of janissaries in their white turbans. These being all soldiers of the Sultan and paid every day, all well-armed men strong in battle, and behind these janissaries were all the officers, and behind these the Turkish Sultan. The first group, which was the Christians, had the task of carrying the ladders to the walls, and they tried to raise the ladders up, and at once we threw them to the ground with the men who were raising them, and they were all killed at once, and we threw big stones down on them from the battlements, so that few escaped alive. In fact, anyone who approached beneath the walls was killed. When those who were raising up the ladders saw so many dead, they tried to retreat towards their camp, so as not to be killed by the stones, and when the rest of the Turks who were behind saw that they were running away, at once they cut them to pieces with their scimitars, and made them turn back towards the walls, so that they had the choice of dying on one side or the other. And when this first group was killed and cut to pieces, the second group began to attack vigorously. The first group was sent forward for 2 reasons. Firstly, because they preferred that Christians should die rather than Turks, and secondly, to wear us out in the city. And as I have said, when the first group was dead or wounded, the second group came on like lions unchained against the walls on the side of San Romano. And when we saw this fearful thing, at once the tocsin was sounded through the whole city, and at every post on the walls, and every man ran crying out to help. And the eternal God showed us his mercy against these Turkish dogs, so that every man ran to ward off the attack of the pagans, and they began to fall back outside the barbicans. They also made a great attempt to raise ladders up to the walls, but the men on the walls bravely threw them down to the ground again, and many Turks were killed. Also, our crossbows and cannon kept on firing into their camp at this time, and killed an incredible number of Turks. When the second group had come forward and attempted unsuccessfully to get into the city, there then approached the third group, their paid soldiers, the janissaries, and their officers and their other principal commanders, all very brave men, and the Turkish Sultan behind them all. This third group attacked the walls of the poor city, not like Turks but like lions, with such shouting and sounding of castanets that it seemed a thing not of this world, and the shouting was heard as far away as Anatolia, 12 miles away from their camp. This third group of Turks, all fine fighters, found those on the walls very weary after having fought with the first and second groups, while the pagans were eager and fresh for the battle. And with the loud cries which they uttered on the field, they spread fear through the city and took away our courage with their shouting and noise. The wretched people in the city felt themselves to have been taken already, and decided to sound the tocsin through the whole city, and sounded it at all the posts on the walls, all crying at the top of their voices, "Mercy! Mercy! God send help from heaven to this empire of Constantine, so that a pagan people may not rule over the empire." All through the city, all the women were on their knees, and all the men too, praying most earnestly and devotedly to our omnipotent God and his mother Madonna, Saint Mary, with all the sainted men and women of the celestial hierarchy, to grant us victory over this pagan race, these wicked Turks, enemies of the Christian faith. While these supplications were being made, the Turks were attacking fiercely on the landward side by San Romano, by the headquarters of the most serene emperor and all his nobles, and his principal knights and his bravest men, who all stayed by him, fighting bravely. The Turks were attacking, as I have said, like men determined to enter the city, by San Romano on the landward side, firing their cannon again and again, with so many other guns and arrows without number, and shouting from these pagans that the very air seemed to be split apart. And they kept on firing their great cannon, which fired a ball weighing 1,200 pounds, and their arrows, all along the length of the walls on the side, where their camp was, a distance of 6 miles, so that inside the barbicans at least 80 camel loads of them were picked up, and as many as 20 camel loads of those which were in the ditch. This fierce battle lasted until daybreak. Our men of Venice did marvels of defence in the part where the bastion was, where the Turks were concentrating their attack, but it was useless, since our eternal God had already made up his mind that the city should fall into the hands of the Turks. And since God had so determined, nothing further could be done, except that all we Christians who found ourselves at this time in the wretched city should place ourselves in the hands of our merciful Lord Jesus Christ and of his mother, Madonna Saint Mary, for them to have mercy on the souls of those who had to die in the battle on this day. 1 hour before daybreak, the Sultan had his great cannon fired, and the shot landed in the repairs which we had made and knocked them down to the ground. Nothing could be seen for the smoke made by the cannon, and the Turks came on under cover of the smoke, and about 300 of them got inside the barbicans. The Greeks and Venetians fought hard and drove them out of the barbicans, and a great number died, including almost all of those who were able to get inside. After the Greeks had fought this fight, they thought that they had indeed won the victory against the pagans, and we Christians were greatly relieved. But after being driven back from the barbicans, the Turks again fired their great cannon, and the pagans like hounds came on behind the smoke of the cannon, raging and pressing on each other like wild beasts, so that in the space of a quarter of an hour there were more than 30,000 Turks inside the barbicans, with such cries that it seemed a very inferno, and the shouting was heard as far away as Anatolia. When the Turks got inside the barbicans, they quickly captured the first row of them, but before they managed this, a great number of them died at the hands of those who were above them on the walls, who killed them with stones at their pleasure. After having captured the first row, the Turks, together with the Aksapi, made themselves strong there. And then there came inside the barbicans a good 70,000 Turks with such force that it seemed a very inferno. And soon the barbicans from one end to the other, a full 6 miles, were full of Turks. As I have said before, those on the walls killed great numbers of Turks with stones, casting them down from above without stopping. And so many were killed that 40 carts could not have carried away the dead Turks who had died before getting into the city. We Christians now were very frightened, and the emperor had the tocsin sounded through the whole city, and at the posts on the walls, with every man crying, "Mercy, eternal God." Men cried out, and women too, and the nuns and the young women most loudly of all. And there was such lamentation that even the most cruel Jew would have felt pity. Seeing this, Juan Justignan, that Genoese of Genoa, decided to abandon his post and fled to his ship, which was lying at the boom. The emperor had made this Juan Justignan captain of his forces, and as he fled he went through the city crying, "The Turks have got into the city." But he lied in his teeth because the Turks were not yet inside. When the people heard their captain's words, that the Turks had got into the city, they all began to take flight, and all abandoned their posts at once and went rushing towards the harbour in the hope of escaping in the ships and the galleys. At this moment of confusion, which happened at sunrise, our omnipotent God came to his most bitter decision and decided to fulfill all the prophecies, as I have said, and at sunrise the Turks entered the city near San Romano, where the walls had been razed to the ground by their cannon. But before they entered, there was such a fierce struggle between the Turks and the Christians in the city who opposed them, and so many of them died, that a good 20 carts could have been filled with the corpses of the first Turks. Then the second wave followed the first and went rushing about the city, and anyone they found they put to the scimitar, women and men, old and young, of any condition. This butchery lasted from sunrise, when the Turks entered the city, until midday, and anyone whom they found was put to the scimitar in their rage. Those of our merchants who escaped hid themselves in underground places, and when the first mad slaughter was over, they were found by the Turks and were all taken and sold as slaves.